Ma'am is the director of Sushruta Hospital, ICSI and Test Tube Baby Center, Nanded. Ma'am has taken advanced training in infertility and clinical embryology from Chennai, Gujarat, Mumbai. Ma'am also has an advanced laparohysterectomy training from Cochin, Mumbai, and Pune. Ma'am has got many academic qualifications. I'm just telling a few. Ma'am is having a fellowship in daycare laparoscopy from Akola. Ma'am is a member of ISAR and IAGE. Ma'am has the credit of having modular ICSI and IVF lab in Nanded, and ma'am is a pioneer in that field, in that particular area. Ma'am also has, to her credit, postmenopausal pregnancy. If you look at ma'am's areas of interest, they are ICSI and advanced hystero and advanced laparoscopy. And I had the pleasure of listening to ma'am quite a few times, and rest assured, with a lot of theory, ma'am has got a lot of practical experience which she will share with us on how to deal with this problem. Over to you, ma'am. I'll just share the screen now.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you, Sheel, for your kind information, and all the participants who have participated in this webinar. Today we are landing in COVID era. This is really a pandemic era. I feel all of you are safe, and I feel you should stay safe at home. Second thing is, today is a World IVF Day. This is 39 years have been completed. That we have started, the IVF has started in world. And you know, as you know, Louis Brown had been brought up today. So remembering Louis Brown and remembering Steptoe and Edwards, I bow to them. And also our own IVF expert of Bengal, Calcutta, you might be knowing Dr. Bhattacharya. So to start with, I will be going with my topic, recurrent implantation failure. So what is this recurrent implantation failure? You know, as the patient comes to OPD with a big file of infertility. So in those patients, whenever the couple comes to the OPD, he has always in his mind whether I'll be becoming pregnant when I come to this OPD or not. Second thing is, he has tried twice, thrice, 4 times, 6 times, and now he's frustrated. The same way, he doesn't want to have that frustration to be carried at home. So he wants to take the baby at home. So he'll be landing up in our OPD with some interest that I would become pregnant. So coming to the topic of recurrent implantation failure. So these are our babies, small amount of babies which have been born at our hospital. These are a boon to us who have given us an input to go ahead with this topic of recurrent implantation failure. Among these are many of them who have gone through 4 times, 3 times, 6 times also. So last was our 6 times failure patient who has conceived, and the baby is laughing in front of you, this baby on the left side. So it's after all, somewhere there is unknown power who helps us to go ahead with this. So to come with the definition of recurrent implantation failure, next slide. So implantation, what is this implantation? It is a unique complex dialogue between receptive endometrium and healthy good quality embryo, where molecular and genetic evidence indicates that ovarian hormones together with locally produced signaling molecule, including cytokines, growth factors, homeobas, then transcription factors, these all endometrial factors play a lot of role along with morphogenic genes. So what is implantation failure? Implantation failure can be used to describe both patients who have never shown quantifiable signs of implantation, such as increased level of SCG production without USG, evidence of gestational sac. Means they have become pregnant, there are increased level of SCG in their blood, but there is no sonographic evidence of a gestational sac. So what Kovalam has suggested, the maternal age, the number of embryos and the stage at which the embryos were transferred is very important when you are defining them as a case of recurrent implantation failure. So failure of clinical pregnancy after 4 good quality embryos for a blasto or 8 cleavage stage of embryos transferred with fresh or frozen cycle in women under the age of 40 years. So these fresh and frozen cycles will be for more than 3 times, or if you are going with a donor embryo, it would be for more than 2 times. Next. So this is the blastocyst activation photograph. Next. 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 So I would like to give you an input of blastocyst implantation essential factors. So what is this blastocyst? This is the day 5 cell embryo. This embryo is meant to go ahead with the live birth. So how does this blastocyst implantation occur, and what is required for this blastocyst implantation? It is really the blastocyst implantation essential factors. What are these factors? There are systemic and local blastocyst implantation factors. So these are expressed in the luminal epithelium in the entire uterus during the receptive state. This receptive state, you will have estrogen, progesterone, and HOXA10 and HOXA11 and amphiregulin genes. The second is local blastocyst implantation factors. That is paracrine, justacrine, autocrine mechanism. Generally, you have paracrine, autocrine mechanism. These mechanisms have heparin binding epidermal growth factor and as well as amphiregulin acting along with them. And this in turn help in implantation of the blastocyst. Next. So what is, there is no universal definition as such for recurrent implantation failure. It is a failure to achieve clinical pregnancy after transfer of, as I had said, 4 good quality embryos in a minimum of 3 fresh or frozen cycles in a woman under the age of 40 years. This was depicted by Colum in 2014. The term recurrent implantation failure is a subgroup of recurrent IVF failure. So recurrent implantation failure is a subgroup of IVF. So failure for implantation after transfer of 2 consecutive cycles after transfer of at least 4 good quality embryos with 2 blastocysts. This was depicted by Polinsky. It is not as the same as RIVF. It is a subgroup of recurrent IVF failures. Next. So how much is the incidence? As such, occurrence is 8 to 33%, but the incidence overall in a cycle is just 10%. So impact, what does it cause an impact? As I told you, whenever the couple comes to OPD with a big file, fat file, they are really interested in taking the baby at home. They are not interested in going ahead with what treatment I am going to give. Doctor, I want to have a baby. Whatever means you see, whether it is with a blasto, with a cleavage, they are not worried about that. They want to take home baby rate of at least 40%. That should happen with them, that they want. So the couple is really distressed, the doctor is frustrated, and there is increase in cost in the procedure. The number of cycles we involve into it, the number of cost is increased. So in that case, you have to look into the cost of the patient. Considering this pandemic era, the patient do not have much of money in their pockets. So you have to look into the cost of the procedure. The next is management. Major challenge to the clinician as well as the employers. What should we think of? Next. So what is the pathophysiology? You should know the pathophysiology, that is the immunological factors. These are the NK cells. These are natural killer cells. What are these natural killer cells? These are the killer cells. These are the cells which help to kill the leukemic cell lines in the body. There are peripheral natural killer cells and uterine natural killer cells. Then what are these uterine natural killer cells? You generally see many of the patients will land up with recurrent implantation or IVF failure or abortion. These patients have a high degree of NK cells. So what are these natural killer cells? They are lymphocytes inside the uterine lining, and these help to grow the embryo as well as help in placentation. But what happens when these NK cells grow in excess? They can cause recurrent implantation failure. So there are 2 types of cells. One is Th1 cell, the second is Th2 cell. So Th1 cells are those cells which can cause abortion if they are in excess, and Th2 cells are those cells which help in implantation. So we want to have a good number of suppressor cells. We want to have good number of suppression of B and T lymphocytes, but we want to have good number of Th2 cells which will help to implant the embryo. So whenever recurrent RIF is seen, these cells play a major role in implanting the embryo. Second is autoantibodies. What are these autoantibodies? These antibodies are anti-cardiolipin antibodies, anti-phospholipid antibodies, and anti-beta-2 glycoprotein antibodies. These antibodies are generally seen in immunological cases, that is in cases of anti-phospholipid antibody syndrome. This is a type of acquired thrombophilia. You should know because there are clotting defects in these patients of acquired thrombophilia, and these patients have antibodies developed in themselves. And if these antibodies, anti-cardiolipin antibodies or antiphospholipid antibodies, are more than 40 GPL units, then these patients can land up with RIF. So we have to see to it. This immunology plays a major role in these patients. Then third thing is hereditary thrombophilia. So First thing I was speaking of acquired thrombophilia. This is hereditary thrombophilia. In that you will see the factor V Leiden deficiency, prothrombin deficiency is there, and one more thing is methyl tetrahydrofolate deficiency. You generally see folic acid deficiency is there, and methyl tetrahydrofolate deficiency is there. These patients also land up with thrombophilia. That is, there is clotting inside the endometrial vessels, that is in the small spiral arterioles, and these in turn cause decreased blood supply to fetus, and the patient land up with abortions. The fourth thing is infective. What is the infective pathophysiology? That is, there are many infections. These infections play a major role. 40 to 60% of the patients have infection. These may be mainly chronic infection. And in India, most common is tuberculosis. You are seeing 90% of the patients who have tuberculosis, the affection is first in the tubes, then in the endometrium, then in the ovaries. So as it is descending infection in those patients, you will see that tuberculosis will cause granuloma also, and it will also cause the death of the fetus and prevent implantation, because it will hamper the growth of the basal as well as the upper part of the endometrium, that is the spongiosal layer, and as well as the functionalized layer won't develop, because it will cause permanent damage to the basal layer as well as the spongiosal and compact layer of the endometrium. Second thing is gram positive and gram negative infections, that is E. coli and Staphylococcus infections as well as chlamydia infection. Whenever you have infective pathology in these patients, do see to it that both the partners are treated, because this is one of the major factors. Then is the leukocyte inhibitory factor. Our endometrium contains leukocyte inhibitory factor. These factors are known to cause implantation. But when you have a deficiency of leukocyte inhibitory factor, in that case you will have more of implantation failures, and also you will have in case of hydrosalpingo also you will have more of LIF, that is leukocyte inhibitory factor would be depressed or decreased, and that in turn will cause more toxicity to the embryo and will cause death of the embryo. And other molecules. What are these other molecules? These are adhesion molecules. Whenever the implantation process occurs, as you know, there is apposition, adhesion, and then invasiveness and implantation. So when there is adhesion of this blastocyst or the implanted embryo to the endometrium, there are many molecules, like there are IL-6, IL-10, LIF. All these adhesive molecules are known to proteases, and all these molecules will help to adhere the embryo to the endometrium. And the other molecules are anti-adhesive molecules is leucine 1. You should remember that. There are also many cytokine and growth factors also which help to implant the embryo. So what are the risk factors? You should never forget the risk factors. The maternal age, yes, more than you see nowadays we are seeing to it, as the age is increasing above 25 and maximum age about 29, these patients have reduced numbers of oocytes in young patients. Whenever see young patients coming to OPD at 29 to 30 years of age, they generally have less number of oocytes or antral follicle count. Along with that, the AMH is really decreased, even if their age is less. So whenever the age is less than 13, you have less amount of AFC or antral follicle count is reduced, that is less than 7, or AMH less than 1.5. These patients are known to have a risk factor for implantation failure. Second thing is when you are having age more than 35 or when age is more than 40, these are patients will have recurrent implantation failure or will have more amount of loss of embryos or more amount of aneuploidies, that is abnormal embryos will be more in these patients. Second is BMI obesity. Obesity carries a major role, because you know whenever the patient is obese, she will have more of androgenic content, she will have more of obesity, and this obesity will cause increase in the leptin inside the follicles. The moment the leptin is increased inside the oocytes, it will cause bad embryo quality, and in turn will also cause the bad implantation in this patient. So obese in these patients should have a reduced BMI. So if the BMI is more than 25, that is obese, or the patient is more than 30 or morbidly obese, that is more than 35 BMI, these patients are known should have a good lifestyle modification with them, so that their weight is decreased and they have good implantation rates. Third thing is smoking. Smoking is indirectly in India. You don't have smoking unless you are the patient, unless the patient is staying in metros. But in small places, the patients are passive smokers. When the husband is smoking or somebody in the house is smoking, in that case, the nicotine is known to cause it causes the vasoconstriction in the uterine vessels as well as in the endometrial vessel. The radial artery goes under vasoconstriction, and in that cases you will have thrombosis and the death of the embryo. Again, the stress. So stress is a very important factor. The moment the patient comes with second, third failure, she has a lot of stress, and as such, due to this busy academic careers in young infertile females, in that cases the cortisol production is very high. This cortisol production will reduce the gonadotropin production and will cause physiological impact in these patients, and they may require help of a psychologist. Fourth is Escherman's syndrome. Escherman's, there are many intrauterine adhesions inside the uterus, and in that case, there will be more of fibrin deposition in the uterus, and adhesions will be there. And in that case, you will see to it that it will cause death of the embryo due to decreased bad implantation and decreased blood supply. Then non-cavity distorting fibroids. These are the fibroids which do not implant inside the uterine cavity. These fibroids more than 4 cm may definitely decrease, may cause contractions and decrease the blood supply to the uterus as well as the implanted embryo. What are the endometrial factors? So major factors in this are endometrial factors, gamete embryology factors, and third is multifactor factors. So what under the endometrial factors is the anatomical factors. So whenever you see the patient, subseptic uterus, polyps, fibroid, adhesion, septum, these are the major reasons. Septum itself is a major cause of this RIF, because septum, you have seen that moment you do septoplasty, 70% of them they conceive it is if it is a complete septum or if it is a partial septum in that case. And polyps are just the endometrial projection inside the uterine cavity. So if these polyps are inside the ostia or inside the endometrial cavity or in the anterior posterior of the uterus, more than 1.5 cm polyps are known to cause RIF. Then fibroids. In fibroids, you have to remember that more than 4 cm intramural fibroid will also cause failures even if it is not indenting inside the uterine cavity. And in case of submucosal fibroids, these fibroids more than 2.5 cm inside the uterine cavity is known to cause bad implantation or won't favor the implantation of the embryo because the blood supply would be hampered to the embryo. That is impaired function. That is thin endometrium. When do you call it as a thin endometrium? The endometrium is thin when it is less than 7. They say, some say if it is less than 6 mm. There is lot of disparity and a lot of discussion goes on thin endometrium. But the endometrium which does not respond below 6 mm or which does not give a good implantation rate, that is below 7 mm, is called a thin endometrium. And second thing is altered expression of adhesion molecules. So whatever adhesion molecules you have, that is IL-6, 10, these molecules are known to cause adhesion of the blastocyst. And if there is alteration of alpha 5 beta 3 or alpha 4 beta 1 integrins, these integrins are known to cause attachment of the blastocyst to the endometrium. The moment this expression is reduced in adenomyosis patients or in case of endometriosis, you will see to it that your implantation will be reduced. Then gonadotropin induced cycle, there is supraphysiological physiological estrogen, and in that case you will again find a RIF. Next. Thyroid dysfunction, as you know, more than 2.5 milli international units is supposed to be having hypothyroidism in infertile patient. So that you have to keep the milieu below 2.5. Gamete embryo transfer. Sperm defects. Sperm, embryo, poor oocyte quality. What is this sperm defect? Sperm has a head, neck and a tail. The moment you have more vacuoles in the sperm or you have a double tail or a bent neck, these sperms are known to cause these morphologically abnormal sperms or reduced motility, asthenothalamic sperm or necrosis, or these patients who have a lot of defects in them, that is the thick neck. These patients with sperm defects are going to give you DNA fragmentation index, very high DNA fragmentation index, and this in turn will cause implantation failure. Then the embryo defect and the poor oocyte quality. So at least grade 1, grade 2 oocyte would give you good embryo, but grade 3, grade 4, you won't have a good embryo. So the quality of oocyte definitely matters, so that you should have a good implantation. Then in the case of chromosomal abnormality, chromosomal abnormality itself causes 30 to 40% of the patients. Generally we see to it we are getting results of only 30 to 40% of IVF or ICSI patients. In our OPD, we see to it that 30 to 40% only patients conceive. Why? Because 60% of the embryo we lose them. Why? Because they are abnormal. And in that case, these abnormalities may come from the maternal side or the paternal side. So these chromosomal abnormalities definitely play a role up to 40 to 60% in all parents. Then it's zona hardening. So zona hardening is one of the factors. Zona hardening means whatever oocyte we are getting, this oocyte has a covering called zona. If the oocyte has a thick zona, that's more than 15 micrometer zona, it will definitely prevent the implantation of the embryo, because it won't allow invasion of the blastocyst. So this more than 15 micrometer zona hardening in patients of more than 40 years of age and in cases of frozen embryos may cause implantation failure. And faulty embryo transfer technique, definitely it plays a role. The faulty embryo transfer technique has 30% role to play in implantation failures. Then is the case of thrombophilia, as I had discussed earlier, infection also. Elevated progesterone level on the day of SCG. Whosoever is doing a IVF, they generally see to it that the progesterone level should not be raised. Why? Because the progesterone is known to cause secretory changes in the endometrium, and this progesterone will cause dysphony in the endometrial and the embryo dialogue. And in that case, what will happen? It will prevent the implantation of embryo. So any patients who are having progesterone more than 1.5 nanogram per ml on the day of SCG, in their cases, you won't get any positive results. So you have to check for the progesterone level. Then the multifactorial factors. These are the third factors: endometriosis, hydrosalpingosis, and suboptimal ovarian stimulation. Endometriosis, 25% of our OPD is of endometriosis. And these endometriosis patients of grade 1, grade 2 also are a major factor to cause failures. So what does endometriosis do? It prevents the adhesion molecules to develop, or the alpha 5 beta 1 or alpha 4 beta 3. These integrins are reduced in cases of endometriosis, and that will cause phagocytosis of the sperm also. The third thing is hydrosalpingosis. Again, hydrosalpinx, as you know, more than 3.5 centimeter hydrosalpinx, or the hydrosalpinx which is seen on sonography, which is the hydrosalpinx which is not seen on sonography can be treated by medical line. But the hydrosalpinx which is more than 3.5 centimeter in size, and in that case, these hydrosalpinx, if they disappear in the luteal phase, in that case you have to see to it this hydrosalpinx should be treated. And these hydrosalpinx have a toxic fluid which can cause the death of the embryo and also cause washing of the embryo. Along with that, it will also decrease the leukocyte inhibitory factor, which is known to cause implantation of embryos. Then suboptimal, the ovarian stimulation, if it's not proper, will also cause bad oocytes and implantation failure. Next please. Next, sir. This is the last thing. Investigation of embryological factor. How we would go with these patients of recurrent implantation failure? It is a really distressing factor. The patient's pockets are empty. Still, you have to go through a battery of tests. But there's we don't have any way out. We have to give her a pregnancy. The thing is, there is always a light at the dark end of the tunnel. So we have to keep hope. So with the investigation, these are the ovarian reserve tests. What Kolam has told that basal AMH, FSH and AFC count a lot. So if the basal AMH is between 1.5 and 3.5 nanogram per ml, or if the FSH is less than 50, less than 10, or AFC if it is more than 7 to 15, these patients will definitely give us a pregnancy. So you have to exclude these factors over reserve test. Then is the sperm DNA fragmentation test. Why sperm DNA fragmentation? Nowadays everybody is doing sperm DNA fragmentation test. I would like you to highlight about regarding sperm DNA fragmentation. What is this? See, every sperm has a DNA. And if this DNA, when you are doing when the patient is landing with recurrent IUI failures or recurrent IVF failures, or if the patient is having recurrent abortions, see to it that her sperm DNA is done, because this sperm DNA can help you to give you good pregnancies. And if this sperm DNA is more than 27%, normally up to 15%, you will get good pregnancy. But 15 to 27%, there are chances of failures. But more than 27%, there will be repeated failures, because there would be defect in the DNA of the sperm. So this has to be detected by different techniques, as I told, SCA or SCD, and these techniques also are done at our lab, or many IVF laboratories also they are doing it for RIF patient. And in that case, what we do, that this RIF, if it is more than 27%, we advise this patient to undergo TSA-XC, because they generally, it is seen that ejaculated sperms gives a better pregnancy than this TSA sperm gives a better pregnancy than this ejaculated sperm, because the reactive oxygen species is less in this testicular sperms. So next is sperm aneuploidy. So sperm abnormalities also are seen in many patients, as Larsen had told. These aneuploidies, that is, as I had told you, that double tail, then double heads, thick neck, coiled tail. These all are decreased motility, asthenospermic sperms. These all are going to cause you aneuploids or abnormal embryos and cause chromosomal abnormalities. Then comes the karyotyping. To rule out all this thing, we should know karyotyping. What is the role of karyotyping? Karyotyping, as such, they say in parents should be done, because there is a 2.5% chance of having an abnormal oocyte or sperm from the parents, which can cause abnormality in the chromosomes, and which in turn will help you to know the abnormalities either of the parents. Then the structural anomalies. So PGD, nowadays it is PGT, not PGD, that is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which will help you. So I would like to highlight us something regarding, next slide, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So generally you say PGT, what is this PGT? Next slide. Next slide, please. So what is this PGT? So pre-implantation genetic test. Why we do this test? So PGD means when the couple is normal, but they are suspecting that their embryo is abnormal, and they would go for a genetic testing of the embryo, that is called pre-genetic diagnosis. Now it comes under the heading of two things, that is pre-genetic testing, and the second thing is pre-genetic screening. So when you are doing the pre-genetic testing, the either of the parent is having a mutation in them or a balanced translocation in them, abnormality in either of the parent or abnormality in their gene, which will help to know whether this offspring will land up with an abnormality. So PGT is nowadays practiced in all the many of the IVF clinics in patients of recurrent implantation failure, as if you are getting 8 embryos but they are looking morphological normal, and in that case, even if you go for a transfer, you don't get pregnancies, you are getting implantation failure, then in that case you can offer PGT to this patient, which will help you to know that which of the parents is abnormal, which is causing a abnormal embryo, even if it is morphologically normal. So in that case, either the donor set or a donor sperm can be offered to these patients, or if the patient has 5 to 6 embryo, these patients will have to undergo biopsy of their genes. This at the 5th day, that is the blastocyst biopsy is taken of this trophoectoderm cells, and these cells are seen under a comparative genomic hybridization technique, in which all the genes, that is all the chromosomes, all the 23 pair of chromosomes are studied, which will help you to know the abnormality in the genes of the embryo, and which will help you to know which, because as after the day 3 of the embryo, the paternal genome acts. So when the paternal genome acts, until day 3 it is the maternal genome which acts. So after day 3, when it comes to blastocyst stage, when you do this technique, that is PGT, that is biopsy of the trophoectoderm, you will know that whether you can transfer this embryo or not. If you have 5 embryos, you do PGT for all the 5 embryos. Then if the 2 embryos are genetically normal, transfer them and give them a normal pregnancy. In case of sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, Down syndrome, you can go ahead with these patients and they can have their own genetic normal baby, because 25% of the patients with sickle cell anemia and thalassemia can go ahead with PGT. Then is evaluation of uterine cavity. This earlier slide I would like to. How should we investigate the patients of RIF morphology? Evaluation of uterine cavity, that is the sonosalpingography or hysterocontrast salpingography. So whenever you are doing, so first of all we should go step by step. First of all, the uterine cavity should be evaluated, that is the HHD should be done, then sonosalpingography should be done, hysterocontrast salpingography should be done. So why? HHG helps you to know any assurements like defects. Then it will also help you to know the beaded appearance of the tube. Where there is no hysteroscopy, you can go with the HSG to evaluate the uterine cavity. Second is the sonosalpingography, when you instill a normal saline inside the uterine cavity, and then you go ahead with the sonography. In that case, you will know the defects in the uterus. Third thing is the hysterocontrast salpingography. Hysterocontrast salpingography means you can inject a dye inside the uterus and then do a salpingography. At my place, we generally believe in doing laparohysteroscopy, which is more practical and which gives you more confirmatory diagnosis. Ovarian function test we have earlier discussed. So laparohysteroscopy not only helps you to know the uterine cavity, that is, you know the septum, you know the Asherman, that is the degree of adhesion, that is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 adhesions also you know the site of the polyps. Fourth thing, you know the fibroid, that is if it is an intramural fibroid, you may go for lap myomectomy if it is more than 4 centimeter, or if it is more than 2.5 centimeters submucosal fibroid, you will go for a resection of the fibroid. So laparoscopy should be done in cases of all cases of fibroids. So laparoscopy has to be done in case of fibroids, so as to know whether these patients of intramural fibroids, if they are more than 4 centimeter, they will go for a lap myomectomy. If they are less than 4 centimeter, in that case you can go for a just a conservative approach. But if they are submucosal fibroid, resection is compulsory if they are more than 2.5 centimeter. But if they are more than 4 centimeter in the case of submucosal case, then you have to do for a resection in 2 sittings. The third thing is, you know the case of endometriosis also. You know, you can go ahead with Asherman's, you can do a septoplasty, and in cases where there is a arcuate uterus, or if there the uterus is T-shaped, you can go for a lateral enhancement of the uterus. Means the lateral wall of the uterus can be enhanced with the bipolar cautery, so that the blood supply of the uterus is increased. Third thing is, you can also go ahead with the TB PCR. At the same time, you can go for endometrial TB PCR. If the endometrial TB PCR is done, in that case, you can send it for the histopathology diagnosis. Second thing is, you can also do a gene expert, which is the latest one. We are used to doing TB PCR, DNA or RNA PCR, or histopathology also is confirmatory. Third thing is, gene expert is the most reliable test. Only thing, it is costly, but it gives a reliable diagnosis of tuberculosis of endometrium. Fourth is also, you can give a laparoscopic diagnosis of tuberculosis. Nowadays, they are saying either of the three, means even if you do histopathology, or you do TB PCR, or you do gene expert for tuberculosis in cases of in India, you will come to a confirmatory diagnosis of tuberculosis. And laparoscopy also, if you suspect there are tuberculosis on the endometrial or in the tubes or ovary, in that case also you can go ahead with the same thing. Coagulation, sir. Anticoagulant, thrombophilia, and clotting screen. So anticardiolipin antibodies, antithyroid antibodies, and also lupus anticoagulant, beta-2 glycoprotein. If you do these tests, this will not only help you to know the thrombophilia syndrome, means you will help to know Appler syndrome also will be detected in that, and Appler syndrome, in that case, immunological factor, as I had told you, anticardiolipin antibodies more than 40 GPL. In that case also, you should think that the patient is going in for, means if the patient is having less than 10 weeks, 1 abortion, or more than 10 weeks, 2 recurrent abortion, or if they are having 1 preterm delivery or preterm stillbirth before 34 weeks of pregnancy, these patients are suspected to have an Appler syndrome or antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. Along with that, many a times PIH is associated. So these patients should be subjected to anticardiolipin antibodies. Again, I repeat, less than 10 weeks, 1 abortion, more than 10 weeks, 2 abortions, or 1 preterm stillbirth before 34 weeks are the patients who are going in for immunological factors. Then the third thing is what you would do. That is correction of uterine septal, hydrosalpingia, and endometriosis. I will take it later on. Next slide. Multidisciplinary approach for management of RIF is necessary. What you would do, an expert fertility specialist or a senior fertility specialist should be there, a senior embryologist should be there, and a reproductive surgeon and a counselor is very important in these cases. Why? Because you want to review the situation. She has undergone 3 failures, 6 failures. But how many failures are you going to allow her to go? Because she has to come out through that mental trauma. So you have to have a team of all embryologists, specialists, and a counselor to counsel her psychologically. Now, psychological counseling plays a very important role in this patient, so that they get a good psychological support to go ahead with their future cycles. And in that case, if you are suspecting that after 6 cycles or 10 cycles she is not getting pregnancies, And then in that case also, that also possibility should be explained to those patients that they should go for surrogacy or adoption in these patients. Next. So what are the methods for treatment? So what you would be doing? The first is improving the endometrial receptivity. The endometrial receptivity can be improved by histoscopic correction of cavity pathology. As I had told, we do here, everybody is nowadays doing a bipolar histoscopy and resectoscopy with a 2.9 mm Betocchi or with a 4 mm. In that case, you can remove the adhesions, you can remove the tubal osteum, and in histoscopy, three things are a must. See the cervical region for polyps, see the endometrium for polyps, see the type of endometrium. If it is a pale looking endometrium with adhesions at the ostia, and in that case micro polyps are there, then definitely it is a case of chronic endometritis. And in that case, tuberculosis has to be ruled out, other infections have to be ruled out, chronic infection. Second thing, if there are grade 3, grade 4 assurance, don't forget tuberculosis in Indian scenario. Third thing is histoscopy also tells you when you remove the distension, you will see a submucosal distension. If you are seeing a submucosal distension, that is a submucosal fibroid or a polyp, which has to be resected at the same sitting if it is less than 2.5 centimeter or more than 4 centimeter with 2 sitting. Similarly, micro polyps in the tubal osteomer, get it removed, get an endometrial biopsy done. And third thing, see for the anterior and posterior walls also. Many a times you will be seeing endometrial patches inside the anterior and posterior wall, which are black, blue, powder burn spots. The moment you open them with the scissors, that the moment this endometric spots will reduce all, they will go off. And second thing is, in these patients, if you do lateral enhancement or septum resection, or whenever you're doing septum resection in this patient, you have to see to it that the septum is not overcorrected nor undercorrected, so that she gets a better pregnancy rate. Third thing is the myomectomy. As I have told you, more than 4 centimeter myoma intramural have to go for a laparoscopic approach. Then 2.5 centimeter submucosal myoma, grade 0, grade 1, they have to go through a hysteroscopic approach. More than 4 centimeter, grade 0, grade 1, submucosal myoma, they require 2 sittings. Third thing is treatment of thin endometrium. Nowadays, treatment of thin endometrium is you are doing many techniques. We are doing GCSF, and we are doing also PRP. Autologous PRP is done in these thin endometrium patients, and it helps in giving us good pregnancy rates. Third thing is endometrial stimulation and biopsy. Same time we can do a biopsy of this patient to rule out tuberculosis, as well as elderly patients to rule out hyperplasia or endometrial cancer. Then we are going through immunotherapy. So the immunotherapy, there is intravenous immunoglobulins, steroids, aspirin, and heparin, as you know. So what is this role? So first is thin endometrium. What you would be doing? First is in thin endometrium, we would be going in for, first of all, we would be excluding tuberculosis, we would be excluding chronic endometritis, and then go ahead with GCSF. So GCSF, how it is given? GCSF, it is given in the dose of, in IUR, IVF cycles, we give 300 microliter of GCSF subcutaneously, either 7 days prior to IUR, or second thought is at least 12 hours prior to the SCG injection, or third thing is after 72 hours, if you are given a first GCSF injection of 300 microgram, you don't get endometrial thickness or increase of endometrial thickness by more than 2 millimeter, then in that case, you can go with the second dose of GCSF. Fourth is, you can also go with the PRP, platelet-rich plasma. What is this platelet-rich plasma? It gives that is the platelet, whatever autologous platelet, that is, we remove the blood from the patient, 15 ml, we centrifuge it twice with first of all with 1200 rpm, then with 3300 rpm, and the middle buffy coat, which contains more of WBC and platelets, that is injected inside the uterine cavity through a hysteroscopy, through a home aspiration needle, or in that case directly we can insert it inside the uterine cavity in case of IUF patients. And in these patients, you can see a good endometrial thickening after 72 hours. So how does it happen? The platelet-rich plasma contains all platelet growth factors, that is the epidermal growth factor, the vascular endometrial growth factors. Then also it also contains the transforming growth factors, fibroblast growth. All growth factors are there in the platelet. So this platelet-rich plasma helps to grow the endometrium, and also the luminal as well as stromal endometrium grow in that case. Second is the immunotherapy. IV, IgG as well as steroid, aspirin, heparin play in case of immunotherapy. What you are going to do? IV, IgG means you can give IV, IgG. So if you are giving IVIGG in that patients, remember that you can give IVIGG, but it is costly injection, costing 14,000. So you have to see to the pocket of the patient also, and you have to tell them that we are giving IVIGG. In which patients you are going to give IVIGG? In patients who have uterine natural killer cell raised. So whenever you are doing a natural killer cell test for all these patients of recurrent implantation failure, we are giving peripheral blood. Generally, the test is done for peripheral blood cells of natural killer cell. But we want to have a result of uterine natural killer cell. So they say there is not much of difference in the peripheral as well as the uterine natural killer cells. So when you are doing the uterine natural killer cell test, in that case, you can know that this, if it is more the CD56, it is a marker of uterine natural killer cell. So if this CD56 is more than 250, then in that case you have to give immunoglobulin to these patients over 2 to 3 hours. So IVIGG can be given in these patients, and it can be repeated to these patients every 15 days if they can afford. But if these patients of immunological factors of recurrent implantation can't afford, then in that case you can give lipids also, 20% lipids, intralipids. They are known to cause a good effect in these patients because they are cheap. Second is intralipids are known to cause suppression of the uterine Th1 uterine natural killer cell, and they increase the Th2 natural killer cells. Remember that these natural killer cells will help in implantation of the embryos, and you can give them every 15 days up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, and it will prevent the recurrent implantation failure because it activates the reticular endothelial system through the triglyceride chain. Second thing is, and the anaphylactic reaction is less with lipids than with immunoglobulins. Remember that. You can also add steroids to this patient. Either methylprednisolone 16 milligram can be given to this patient till 9 weeks of pregnancy or throughout pregnancy. So looking into it that their hyperglycemic or their glucose index is normal, then in that case steroids can be given, or you can give prednisolone 5 milligram. Third thing, ecosprin or aspirin can be given. Aspirin has a role to play. It alters the thromboxane A2 and prostacyclin ratio. So you can give a dose of 75 to 100 milligram, which will help in implantation of the embryo. What does heparin do? Heparin, when you are giving, there is heparin epidermal growth factor inside the endometrium. It helps in implanting the embryos, and it will also prevent the clotting mechanism in thrombophilia patients. So the clots inside the radial arteries, spiral arteries will be reduced, and you get a good implantation. This is the endometrial receptivity. Second thing is treatment of the embryos. What will be doing? Pre-implantation genetic screening. I had stressed on PGT earlier also that PGT has to be done of all the patients or of all the embryos, so that you can know the best embryo has been transferred. For PGT, the cost is high. So in that case, if you are 5 to 6 or 7 to 8 embryos, you can post them for a biopsy of blastocyst biopsy. And if the blastocyst biopsy after 6, if the 3 embryos are good, transfer them, get a pregnancy. Assisted hatching. Assisted hatching, what it will happen? Why you do assisted hatching? See, in patients more than 40 years of age, the zona is hardened, more than 15 micron. Or if you are doing a frozen embryo transfer, nowadays we do go for a frozen embryo transfer. Many times these embryos have thick zona, that is more than 15 micron. So then the implantation is failed, or there is no invasion due to the thick zona. So to reduce that zona thickness, we do a chemical hatching, that is called thyroid hatching, or you can do a laser hatching at multiple spots. This can cause partial zona thickening is reduced, partial zona hatching, which will help in implantation of the embryos. The third thing is co-culture. Co-culture means what they do nowadays, that if you are doing, if you are culturing the embryos, you can transfer some amount of endometrial cells or granular cells, which will have a embryotrophic action and help in growth of the embryo. So you can put in the culture media, but this is a study. And improving ET technique. 30% of the embryo transfers or recurrent implantation failures are attributed to faulty embryo transfers. So whenever you are doing embryo transfer, first of all, see to it, it can be done with a full bladder or a non-filled bladder. So when you are doing with a full bladder, see to it that you have a good interface. Then the cervix, see the mucus cervix is seen clearly, the mucus is removed, so there is no entrapment of the embryos. Third thing is, whenever you are putting, the outer catheter should be just near the internal os or just beyond the internal os, just use approximation of the internal os. Then the fundal to internal os diameter, this length should be calculated, and this short of 1.5 centimeter short of fundal endometrial interface, the embryo should be transferred, so that you get good implantation rate when you are transferring the embryos just below the fundal endometrium, 1.5 to 2 centimeter below the fundal endometrium, because there is a maximum implantation potential there. Third thing is, whenever you are transferring the embryos, the loading to the transfer technique should not take more than 3 minutes. Ideally, it is one minute, but not more than 3 minutes. Second thing is, whenever you are transferring the embryo, they should be transferred with a slow speed, so that there should be no hassle. Otherwise, what would happen? The embryos would go and get transplanted inside the tubes, and there would be chance of high transfer or ectopic pregnancy. Or if you transfer it low, there are chances of cervical pregnancy or failures. So whenever you are transferring the embryos, see to it, we withdraw the catheter with the closed plunger, so that they are not again regurgitated inside the catheter. That care you have to take. Fourth thing is, whenever you are transferring the embryo, you have to see to it that the catheter is rechecked following transfer, the outer as well as the inner catheter, so that there are no retained embryos inside the catheter. And the fifth thing is, the patient should be advised rest for 15 to 20 minutes. There is no need to have a big 6 hours or 5 hours bed rest. Then the multifactorial treatment options. One more thing is treatment of endometriosis. They are saying that this multifactorial treatment, that is in case of endometriosis, the integrin, that is adhesive molecules alpha 4 and beta 1 or alpha 5 beta 3 integrins are reduced. And these integrins, if you want to increase, you have to give a long agonist protocol in these patients. If you give a long agonist protocol, these patients will have a good amount of good endometrium and will have good endometrial receptivity also. Third thing is this danazol. Danazol can be given in this patient. Then salpingectomy in case of hydrosalpingism. If the patient is having a bilateral hydrosalpingism, in that case, what will happen? If you are able to remove this, do the salpingectomy, it would be a best option in case of more than 3.5 centimeter hydrosalpingism. But if you can't do a salpingectomy, if you feel that there are intestinal adhesions over the tube, then you can go for a bilateral clipping of both the tubes, so that you don't have a regurgitation of the tubal fluid inside the endometrium, which can cause toxic, which will be toxic and cause death of the embryo. Tailoring of the stimulation protocols. If you have put the patient on antagonist protocol, if she fails repeatedly, change the protocol, go for an agonist protocol, so that you get good results. And the change of protocols may give good embryos also. And in case of that, in many patients who are cases of poor ovarian reserve, where you are not getting good endometrium, in that case, or you are not getting good synchronized follicles, you can go for luteal phase estradiol treatment. So from day of 25th day or from 22nd day of the cycle, previous cycle, you can put them on estradiol, variate 2 mg BD, and can be continued till you start gonadotropins, till the either day of the earlier day of gonadotropins, so that you get a good pace or a good synchronous cohort of follicles. So this tailoring is very important. Then is low molecular heparin also can be given in patient when you have failed transfer. Next question. Next question. Psychological support. Psychological assistance is very important. You should have a good psychologist, or your embryologist along with your counselor should be a good one who can give her a good psychological support. And one more thing is, I would like to stress on ERA. I didn't stress on ERA. ERA is an endometrial receptivity assay. That is a assay of endometrial receptivity technique. That is, patients who have repeated implantation failures. As we know, we do, whenever patient comes to OPD, what we do, generally we go ahead with the routine investigation. We do her HbA1c, that she is not having a hyper glycosylated content. We do her thyroid, we do her rule out her prolactin content, because if she is having more than 20 prolactin level, we give her cabergoline so that her stress levels are reduced. Then fourth thing is, she should be undergoing for other tests of anticardiolipid antibodies, antiphospholipid antibodies, so that these patients do not have Apla syndrome in them. Second thing is, we go for uterine natural killer cells or peripheral natural killer cell if the availability is there. We go for a repeat hysteroscopy in this patient. So this correction of anatomical factors is really important in this patient, because in patients of recurrent implantation failure, some of the patients The hysteroscopy has been a diagnostic hysteroscopy earlier. So now a repeat hysteroscopy has to be done, that whether she has developed again a small polyp or again adhesion to see. So re-hysteroscopy has to be done in these patients, or co-culture can be done. Then we going ahead with laparohysteroscopy if she is having a case of tuberculosis. Remember that the Center for Disease Control of Tuberculosis of India, they have told that if you have a histopathology diagnosis, or if you have a endometrial TB PCR positive, or if it is a gene expert test positive, or a laparoscopy finding of tuberculosis along with infertility, these patients can be put on, means either of the one of these findings along with laparoscopy findings with infertility can be posted for anti-tubercular treatment. What is this anti-tubercular treatment? First 2 months we would be giving 4-drug regime, that is INH, ethametol, pyrazinamide and rifampicillin, and next 4 months we would be omitting pyrazinamide. So this regime has to be given at least for 6 months, and then review the patient, and later on these patients can be put on endometrial factors. So as we have corrected the hysteroscopic correction of the uterine cavity, then the removal of fibroids has been done. As I have told, myomectomy has been done, improvement of endometrial function has been done with low dose aspirin and vaginal sildenafil. So how you would improve her endometrium? Low dose aspirin, that is 40 units you can give to these patients minimum you can give, or some studies say it is 20 units. How does aspirin help? It alter the thromboxane as well as prostacyclin ratio, and improves the blood flow in the patients of thrombophilia or Apla syndrome, and it will also help. And this aspirin is this low dose aspirin along with low molecular heparin. Aspirin can be given in dose of 75 to 100 milligram, and low molecular weight heparin in the dose of 40 units can be given together, so that it will reduce the chances of clotting mechanism, and it will also help in improving the blood flow in the radial arteries. It will also reduce the oxygen concentration in the spiral arterioles. So this will help not only to improve the blood flow in the basal layer of endometrium, but also help in implantation. Then is vaginal sildenafil. It plays a major role. Sildenafil, as you know, it is a 5-phosphatase inhibitor. It will not only help you to it will help to improve the nitric oxide donor activity, that is it will cause relaxation of the all the blood vessels, radial arteries as well as the spiral arterioles, and improve the endometrial growth. So you will have a glandular and luminal endometrial growth in case of sildenafil, which can be given in the dose of 25 milligram QD, that is 100 milligram you can give throughout the day. It can be given vaginally or orally from the 6th day of cycle till the day of transfer. A day prior to transfer you have to stop it and again restart it following transfer till you get pregnancy, or till the pregnancy is till 5 months of pregnancy, or till 9 months also you can give. Only thing, you have to stop 1 day prior to the transfer. Second thing, aspirin also same thing, you have to stop it 15 days prior to her term. And fourth thing is, you can also give GCSF to improve the endometrium. GCSF, as I had told you, 300 microgram. There are 3 school of thoughts. It can be given 7 days prior to the embryo transfer, from 2nd to 7th day, or if you put the patient on estradiol valerate, that is a major role. So there are different types of estrogens which you are using nowadays for improving the endometrium. First is estradiol valerate, which is given orally 2 milligram, maximum up to 16 milligram. People also have given up to 18 milligram. Few days every 6 hourly can be given orally. You can give Proganova, you can give Istrabate also, but Istrabate, or you can give hemihydrate also. These all oral estrogens, they have one side effect. If the patient is obese, hypertensive, diabetic, remember that you can't give excess dose. That can land up with sudden thromboembolic complications and can cause failures in this patient. So when you are putting up obese patient or diabetic hypertensive patient, mind it well how much dose of oral you are giving to this patient. So these patients should be given along with that transdermal estrogel. Nowadays you are getting estrogel as a pump also. 2.5 gram to maximum 7.5 gram can be given, which can be applied to the non-hairy areas of the skin, that is the abdomen as well as the skin. And in that case, you can have in that case, you can give this up to 9 weeks of pregnancy. So as the placenta takes over, till 9 to 10 weeks, you can give estrogel or estradiol valerate or estradiol hemihydrate also. There is a role of vaginal estradiol also, they say. One study was done by Karnek, they said he had done. It was 25 microgram of estradiol valerate he had given. But there was not much of difference when he had given vaginal estriol valate than oral hydrate. So I would prefer in obese, hypertensive, diabetic patient half the dose of oral and half the dose of transdermal gel. The bioavailability of transdermal gels is minimum, but the bioavailability of oral is more. But oral goes through liver, so it can cause, it has a hepatic bypass effect. But in this case of transdermal gel, you can avoid the hepatic bypass effect. So you can try transdermal gel along with oral also, or plain oral can be given up to 16 milligram, and gel can be given up to 7.5 milligram. Third thing is, you can also give sildenafil, as I had told you, maximum 100 milligram can be given, and it can be continued throughout the pregnancy, which can helps also to reduce IUGR in this patient. Fourth thing is GCSF, as I have told you, 7 days prior to transfer. The moment patient has been put on estriol valate, if you are not getting a good endometrium, if it is less than 6 millimeter, use GCSF on the day of SCG or 12 hours prior to the SCG. If you don't get good endometrium in 48 hours, repeat the dose of GCSF. So maximum 2 doses of GCSF can be given. But in case of embryo transfer, you can give between 2 to 7 days, and again repeat after 48 to 72 hours if you are not getting a good endometrium. Means after 2 millimeter at least endometrium rise should be there. The third thing, in case of recurrent implantation failure, there is one study which says that you can give 60 microgram of GCSF daily, means at least 300 microgram every 5 days following transfer. In those patients, the one the patient is pregnant, you can stop it in case of recurrent implantation failure and recurrent abortions also. Now, one study is of intrauterine installation of recurrent, in case of recurrent implantation failure, you can put GCSF intrauterine also. One more study is to improve thin endometrium. If you are getting a resistant type of endometrium which is not responding to estradiol valate, which is not responding to gels, which is not responding to sildenafil, aspirin, low molecular heparin, and GCSF, then in that case you can try autologous PRP. You can also try this. One more thing is that you can go ahead with autologous PRP. That is, you can wash this platelet-rich plasma can be injected twice. Once you can inject it on the 12 to 13 day also you can inject it, or 48 hours prior to transfer you can inject platelet-rich plasma. So in that case you will get a good endometrium. So you, as I had told you have to centrifuge it twice, and then you have to inject this platelet-rich plasma. One more thing is, we do ERA testing in these patients. If it is a thin endometrium, you are not getting good result, then you have to see for endometrial receptivity assay array. So what they do in this technique, in short, I would like to tell that there are 238 to 248 genes in our endometrium. These are transcriptomic RNA genes. These genes are altered in case of endometrial receptivity. If you have bad endometrial receptivity, in that case, what will happen? You will have to see that whether this patient, why this patient is not conceiving. If the patient had 2 recurrent failures with her own embryos, or 1 recurrent failure with a donor embryo, or a case of unexplained infertility, in that case definitely go for an endometrial receptivity array. For that case, you have to do hysteroscopy earlier. You should see to it that her endometrium is at least 6.5 millimeter. So in that case, what you would do, you would do estradiol valate for 10 to 12 days. If it is 6 millimeter, then in that case, after 12 days of endometrial development, you will give maximum 6 milligram to 8 milligram of estradiol valate for 12 days. Then in that case, after that, you will give 5 days progesterone, and you will do a biopsy. If you are, this is done in earlier to frozen embryo transfer. Earlier means -1 cycle you will be doing this technique. So 12 days you are given estradiol valate of 8 milligram to 12 milligram to develop your endometrium. From that day, after 12 days, you start with progesterone 5 days. On the 5th day of progesterone, we will take a biopsy, and this biopsy you will be sending it for receptive or non-receptive endometrium. So the interpretation is that the endometrium is receptive or non-receptive. Receptive endometrium means the endometrium which has similar genes to the genes which are supposed to be there. Means this endometrium will give a good blastulation rate. Means the embryo will get implanted. So in that case, on the 5th day of biopsy, if it is a receptive endometrium, the window of implantation you will know, and you will transfer on the same day as you have taken the biopsy. So if you have taken the biopsy on the 5th day of the progesterone, the same day you calculate in the frozen cycle and you transfer the embryo. But if the endometrium is non-receptive, what you are going to do? Then it is a pre-receptive endometrium or a post-receptive endometrium. So what will happen? Then you have to go for personalized window of implantation. Means you have to go for a separate individual approach. That is, if the patient will be giving estradiol valate for 12 days or 15 days in this patient. Then if the endometrium is developed up to 6-8 millimeter, then you will be giving her progesterone for 5 days. You will be doing a biopsy for her, and in that biopsy, if it turns out to be pre-receptive, then if you want to go for a blasto embryo, then or if you want to go for a day 3 embryo, then in that case, whatever day you are suggested for pre-receptive endometrium, 2 days prior to that, you have to transfer the embryo. Remember that. That is the way. It is a personal window of implantation. But there is a lot of dispute. Many of them, they say we get good result. Some of them, they say we don't get result with endometrial receptivity array. That is a personal choice. Only the test is very costly and it should be affordable to mediocre and low grade patients. Then is the role of, as I have discussed with hyperprolactinemia, everything I have told, then is the role of freezing of embryos. All the embryos, if you are not having, if you have done a fresh embryo, if you want to go for a fresh embryo transfer, you have to see to it that the oocytes are less than 13 oocytes, so that you can go ahead with the fresh embryo transfer. But if you feel that there are more than 13 or 15 oocytes, that she is getting hyperstimulated, better freeze her embryos. Why? Because in fresh transfer, there is definitely a dyssynchrony in the endometrium and the embryo, because the dyssynchrony is due to the elevated progesterone level. Supraphysiological estrogen levels and progesterone levels will cause corpus luteum deficiency, and this will also cause in turn decrease in the adhesion molecules inside the uterus, and this will prevent the implantation of blastocysts. So freeze the embryos and go ahead with freezing of freeze-all protocol. Only in cases where you get less number of embryos or in case of poor responders, in that case you can definitely go with a fresh transfer, provided the embryos are normal. Then one more thing is vaginal macro, as I have told, and pentoxifylline and high dose vitamin E. These are empirical treatment. You can go ahead with them. But pentoxifylline, as I have told, Trental. This Trental, it is xanthine derivative. This is antithrombotic. It reduces the oxygen stress. And if you give this in a high dose, that is if you are giving up to 800 milligram, or if you are giving a dose of vitamin E of up to 1000 milli international units, in that case, prior to transfer, 6 months prior to transfer and continued following transfer, some of the patients in Lady Bentley et al. 2002 showed better results. Next. Next. So as I told, endometrial scratching is also one of the treatment they say. 7 days prior to the onset of menstruation, that is in prior cycle, you can go with the endometrial scratching, or in the not in the follicular phase. But they say, why endometrial scratching? Earlier they used to do DNC, but it was created from all sides. But endometrial scratching is a different technique. How it helps? It induces desudrilization of the endometrium, provokes wound healing and secretion of cytokines and growth factors, which are very important part to play. They recruit stem cells to the endometrium and create a partial new endometrium, which is free of epigenetic defects. Means there are no defects. You are causing regeneration because stem cells are regenerated in that. Next. How do you do endometrial scratching? Next. See, the first the people sample is inserted. Please show that slide. Please. The people is inside and it reaches the fundus. The inner plunger is withdrawn to apply suction force to endometrial cavity. The scratch is done to the superficial layer is performed with, so that is hoovering movement, that in and out movement they are doing, and this will help not only help in desudrilization of the endometrium. So this you can do in earlier cycle, that is on the 7 days prior to menstruation, you can do it, or just post menstruation. Next. Next. And earlier talked about. Then PGT also, as I have told you, what all we can do it for the embryos. PGT, as I have earlier told you, PGT has to be done for all the patients who are elderly, who have unexplained infertility, recurrent abortions, or more than 35 years of age, or there is family history of Down-Patau syndrome or single gene defect muscular dystrophy, these patients are supposed to be the patients for PGT. So I feel if there are facilities of PGT at our place and the patient is affording, definitely go ahead with it. Second thing is sperm DFI test. Yes, unexplained infertility, recurrent IVF failures. DFI has a role to play, and there are many assays, SCD assay. Now I'm getting DFI kits which can be done locally also. The main motto is why DFI occurs, you should know. The patient should be abstain from smoking, tobacco chewing, and whatever stress factors he is going through, so that the DFI count improves and there is less than 15% DFI in those samples. So oral antioxidants also can be given to these patients for a period of 2 to 3 months. Coenzyme Q10 100 mg BD can be given. Along with that, vitamin E, vitamin C, and selenium also can be given. ICSI can be tried in these patients of recurrent implantation failures, or in these patients you can go for co-culture. You can instill granules or endometrial cells. The facilities are available so that they can give good amount of pregnancies. So sperm DFI, sperm means DNA fragmentation index, as I had told you. So these patients should be subjected to testicular spermatozoa. Why? Because DFI as such, if you give ejaculated sperm, in that the DFI content is more, because the ROS, reactive oxygen species, are more. But when you are doing testicular spermatozoa, in that case you will see to it that the ROS species is less. So the testicular spermatozoa gave better pregnancy in patients who have repeated ICSI failures and who have DFI, increased DFI. Assisted hatching I have already discussed. Then is blastocyst transfer. Blastocyst transfer, why? See, you are doing maternal genome has a role to play till day 3. After day 3, it is the paternal genome which plays a role. So blastocyst transfer you are doing. So both the genomes, if they have to play a role, if they are both are good, that is maternal as well as paternal genome, they are morphological, they are chromosomally normal, then you will get a good blastocyst. So blastocyst transfer is definitely 50 to 60% has a better pregnancy rate than a cleavage stage embryo. So Garif and et al. Improved embryo selection and uterine selectivity also. When you are transferring the blastocyst, you are exposing the endometrium to 5 days progesterone. So the pin code formation is also well. And so the window of implantation is also improved. And the integrins also are improved. So the moment the pin codes are increased, you will get a good implantation rate, and so the blastocyst will implant better. So patients who are, nowadays there is a trend for single embryo transfer, but patients who are elderly repeated implantation, you can transfer 2 blasto, at least you can transfer good morphologically and chromosomally normal blasto after doing a blastocyst biopsy. Next. So as I had told you, ET also I have discussed regarding embryo transfer. Vitamin D supplement is also plays a role. Personalized ET, as I told you, ERA has a role to play. It is receptive or not. Personalized embryo transfer performed a day. They said 50% pregnancy had occurred, then normal. Personalized window of implantation, as I told you, if the patient is receptive, then in that case, we have to individualize. At the moment you send the biopsy for endometrial receptivity array, they give you a diagnosis of receptive endometrium. Then on that same day, when you are taken a biopsy, that day, same day, you have to do the transfer for receptive endometrium. For non-receptive endometrium, again I am stressing, if you are, it is a non-receptive endometrium, it is pre and post-receptive. If it is, if you are getting confused with pre and post-receptive, I would like to tell you that non-receptive endometrium, you have to do in 10% of the patient, you have to again take a biopsy and send it to them. And if they say that transfer has to be done, then in that case, if it is a day 3 embryo, you have to transfer it 2 days prior to the day of biopsy. Next. Next. So multifactorial, many things I have told you. So in short, conclusion, many unknown and known diseases of RF, and we do not have the tools to diagnose each of them. After failure of 2 or 3 transfer of good quality embryos in the nutrient with clinical pregnancy rate of at least 30%, but should take some special measure. So what is this multidisciplinary approach? In short, regarding investigation, as I have told you, blood test you have to do for RIF, thyroid, prolactin, as you do earlier. HbA1c should be done in obese patient as they are hyperglycemic. Fourth is you have to do with antiphospholipid antibodies, anti-nuclear antibodies, and anti-cardiolipin antibodies. So Apla syndrome has to be done. uterine natural killers can be done in this patient, or you can go earlier for an endometrial scratching, and tuberculosis should be ruled out in this patient. Then endometrial receptivity array is also has a role to play. These are the and last but not the least, PGT, pre-genetic testing plays a bigger role nowadays. Without that, the investigations are not complete in case of recurrent implantation failure. And in the treatment part, not the least, you have to develop a good, the treatment is anatomical, that is improving the by laparoscopy, remove the fibroids, remove the improve the endometrium, remove the fibroids, the Asherman syndrome, and the polyps. Then septums should be removed. The endometriotic cyst should be cleared off. These endometriotic cysts, if they are less than 2.5 centimeter, they can be treated with the GnRH rather than GnRH analog. Progesterone receptor modulators can be used, or GnRH analogs can be used. But I generally prefer, endometriosis is a disease which can kill or which can reduce your oocyte quality or reduce your AMH level also. So I feel any endometrium, or for that matter more than 2.5 centimeter, requires a surgical removal. Don't go and aspirate it. These endometriomas are going to get infected. So these endometrioma should be enucleated, and the thing should be, the patient's AMH should be done earlier, and the patient should be informed that you have to go for a recurrent endometrioma format. Many a times they have to be considered that endometriomas recur in 25% cases in 2 years and 50% in 5 years. So these patients should be counseled earlier only before going in for a endometrial enucleation. And if the endometrioma are recurring, then the patient should be informed regarding if the quality of oocyte is bad. With the recurrent endometrioma and AMH is decreased, the patient should go for a oocyte donation in these patients. And last but not the least, the hydrosalpingosis should be clipped, or salpingectomy is the ideal solution. If you can do it, that's well and good. Doesn't hamper the blood supply, but you get good results. And a myomectomy, as I have told you, more than 4 centimeter intramural myoma also should be removed, and more than 2.5 centimeter submucosal myoma has to be removed. And the thing is, you have to do a lateral enhancement of the uterus. Rehysteroscopy has to be done in this patient so that some amount of blood supply is increased. And fifth is none but the least, that tuberculosis should be treated for 6 months. Endometrial sketching, as I have told you, and endometrial preparation also should be done in these patients. And regarding the treatment part, first is the anatomical part we have treated. Then second is the endometrial part we are going to treat. That is the endometrial part, as I had told you. We are going to treat the endometrial part by doing a blastocyst transfer rather than going for a cleavage stage transfer. Third thing is, you can go for a sequential transfer also. In some of these RF patients, we had patients who have responded well to these sequential transfers. And co-culture is also one of the methods which can help them to get a embryotrophic effect in them. Assisted hatching in these patients generally helps out, not in many patients. Some of the patients who have thick zona and who are elderly may help. Last but not least, donor embryo is one of the options if they are getting bad quality of oocytes or bad quality of sperm, or if the DNA fragmentation index is very high. In that case, you can go for a TISA in these patients, and go ahead with micro TC. Also nowadays we are doing micro TC, so that under microscope you can remove minimal amount of sperms, and these sperms give you good amount of motility and good amount of sperm, so that they can have their own genetic baby. Unless the patient doesn't get good genetic sperm with micro TC, in that case you can go for a donor sperm, which has its own limitation, with the consent of the husband and wife. Last but not least, the lifestyle modification is a must in this patient. So treatment, anatomical part, the embryological part, and multifactorial part, lifestyle modification of their BMI should be reduced between 18 to 23. The BMI should not be less than 18 nor more than 23, which can cause you many complications during pregnancy also. The third thing is smoking and should be hampered. And last but not the least, the patient should be counseled for pre-genetic testing, surrogacy, and donor embryo. And last but not the least, 5% of them should be advised adoption. That also should not be forgotten, because you are sitting in a IVF OPD. You just can't tell them always go for a donor embryo transfer, go for a sperm donation or oocyte donation. Many of them won't be happy with that. So 5% of them, they are resistant cases. In that case, you can tell them either surrogacy, or you can go for adoption. So last but not least, this multidisciplinary approach, that is the a good senior fertility expert, a good embryologist, and third thing is a good counselor or and a reproductive surgeon. All four of them, along with the unknown power of the God, this all of them will help them to come out of this infertility trauma, and that will also reduce the mental stress and frustration of the gynecologist. Thank you. So do not lose hope. After recurrent implantation failure, good things take time. Remember that. Yes, Kiran? Unmute करा लगेल क्या?
Ma'am, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear.
I forgot to unmute myself.
Okay, that will
so thank you so much for a wonderful talk, ma'am. I think you covered a lot of practical aspects, more than theoretical, with a lot of clinical studies as well. Ma'am, let me start off by asking two questions from my side, ma'am.
Yeah,
you spoke about sildenafil in the management of blood supply.
Procedure.
Ma'am, there are a lot of studies which are currently emerging saying that L-arginine and leucine also have some role. What is your opinion on these two particular molecules, ma'am?
Yeah, L-arginine also, it plays a good role. They say 1.5 gram, that is 2.6 gram per day. If you give it, it definitely improves the uterine, you can say endometrial receptivity by improving the blood flow in the radial arteries. It is a nitrate oxide donor. It helps you not only help to decrease the oxygen tension in the radial arteries, but it also improves the blood flow in the radial arteries. So if you give L-arginine, it will definitely improve the endometrial receptivity will improve, and some amount of integrins will be improved, they say. But main is it is nitric oxide donor. It will improve the it will cause the vasodilation of the radial arteries and improve the blood flow. In turn, it will cause the development of luminal and glandular epithelium of the endometrium.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, nowadays there's a lot of talk of probiotics. So they say that probiotics are actually implicated in a variety of pathogens, ma'am.
Yes.
What is your opinion on using probiotics to prevent recurrent implantation failure, ma'am? Especially ET transfer and all that.
Probiotics, normal, our uterine endometrium contains lactic acid bacillus.
Right.
So we should know that whenever you are getting these patients, if there are cases of chronic endometritis, or if they are case of tuberculosis, or case of recurrent implantation failure, or if they have a thin endometrium, definitely they have a role to play, that is lactic acid bacillus. If you are given 15 days prior to transfer, or if you are given continuously following transfer for 15 days, definitely these prebiotics definitely improve the lactic acid contained in the lactic acid bacillus contained in the endometrium and helps in implantation. So you can give these patients lactic acid bacillus.
Thank you, ma'am.
And there are nowadays coming vaginal prebiotics also, they are coming with EPH and all. That also you can give. That will improve your flora of endometrium.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, we'll go to the audience questions now. Ma'am, the first question is from Dr. Vijayalakshmi Rangaraj. So she's got three questions actually. I'll read one by one. Her first question is, ma'am, can we start low molecular weight heparin? I think you covered this, ma'am. Can we start LMW heparin empirically in patients who have had one failed embryo transfer?
Definitely. Low molecular weight, one failed embryo transfer. If she is affording, you can go for a uterine natural killer cell or Apla syndrome or anticardiolipid antibodies, everything. But if she has one failure, if she is not affording for all these investigations, we generally at our unit start with 20 to 40 units of heparin, irrespective of her weight, prior to transfer. From the 5th day, we start low molecular heparin daily for these patients. And moment the transfer is done, this heparin is given according to 15 milligram per kg body weight. According to her weight, we increase the dose, and it is to be given till her delivery. And post delivery also you can give it.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, you spoke about steroids. So the next question is, which steroids are best in RAF, and what is the dose and from when to give it?
Yeah, steroids, they say steroids have a role to play in immunological causes of infertility. They say if you are giving steroids, that is prednisolone, or you can give I generally give methylprednisolone, or you can give plain prednisolone also to this patient, because they reduce the uterine natural killer cell, that is the Th1 cells are reduced and the Th2 cells are improved in this patient. And in cases of antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, where there are many antibodies in these patients, they are suppressed. That is the B cells as well as T cells are suppressed. So if you give to these patients methylprednisolone, 16 milligram can be given. You can give first in 15 days, 16 milligram daily, then you can give it half OD. Provided the patient is non-diabetic. You have to see to it her
Definitely.
glycemic levels, and you have to inform the patient, provided she is not having any infections. Or you can give prednisolone plain 5 milligram BD also can be given throughout pregnancy, but in tapering doses. Once you give up to 12 weeks, same dose. After 12 weeks, we taper the dose. If the patient says that she's having swelling on her face or she's having swelling all over body, then I reduce it to half OD. That is, if she's getting 16 milligram, we'll make it to half OD. That is 8 milligram OD till her pregnancy, means till delivery. I continue.
Right, ma'am. So, ma'am, suppose we continue to use it for a long time.
Yeah,
Are there
yeah.
any possible side effects, ma'am?
Osteoporosis. Yeah, yeah. Definitely, there are diabetogenic side effects and as well as side effect of osteoporosis that you have to take into consideration. But such a minimal dose with a long, I mean, many patients of RF we have given with this study. We do generally do HbA1c of these patients every 3 months. So whenever we see that HbA1c is less than 6.5, we are not that much worried. Or if the patient is not having a moon face, in that case, we generally continue the dose. We do not stop it, and anyway, they are on calcium,
Right.
because vitamin D3 also equally plays a role in these patients. So vitamin D3 along with calcium is with them when they are pregnant, and if they are not pregnant, we generally give vitamin D3 to these patients.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there are two questions from Dr. Natesh Prabhu. The first question is, what is the role of PRP and bone marrow mononuclear cells in increasing endometrial receptivity?
At least I don't do stem cell therapy, but stem cell therapy has a role. But platelet-rich plasma definitely we do for IUI patient also, and also for thin endometrium patient. So platelet-rich plasma, they say that there are platelet-rich plasma contains many factors, that is growth factors in it and cytokines in it. What these growth factors are? This endometrium contains many growth factors. What are these growth factors? That is epidermal growth factor, transforming growth factor, fibroblast growth factor. These growth factors, whenever you are instilling platelet-rich plasma, they help to improve the endometrial perfusion. That is, we are improving the endometrial perfusion, the receptivity is improved, and also the endometrial growth is improved by these growth factors. So, when you are doing PRP, generally we do PRP for thin endometrium. Many of them they do for ovarian rejuvenation also nowadays. But when you are doing PRP, you withdraw 15 ml blood, and then this 15 ml blood is centrifuged at 3,300 or 4,000 RPM, and for 12 minutes. Then the middle layer is removed, and again the same 3,000 RPM, 3,300 RPM, they'll be again centrifuging, and then the middle layer again it is removed. So twice you are centrifuging it. First with 3,000 RPM to 4,000 RPM. The middle layer, why? Because the platelet-rich plasma, when you remove 15 ml, there is a middle layer is a buffy coat. It contains more of WBC, and it is rich in platelets as well as WBC, which will help in the endometrial growth. So this is again centrifuged second time, and the 0.5 to 0.5 ml is then injected inside the uterine cavity as you do IUI. That time we are injecting inside the uterus, and it has to be injected slowly over a period of 3 minutes. And when you will be doing it, if in case of IUI, if I have to go for PRP by 12th day or 14th day, when the endometrium is not developing, by 10th day, if we are not getting at least 8 millimeter endometrium, then in that case I would do a PRP in that patients, and I will wait for 48 to 72 hours. And still, if I don't get good response, then we would do a repeat PRP in these patients. Twice PRP would be done in this patient. Nowadays, there are PRP kits also, but we are doing autologous PRP in these patients. That is more cheaper and gives good endometrial growth factors and helps in rejuvenating the endometrium and good implantation rate also.
Right. Ma'am, the second question also is from Natesh Prabhu on PRP. So he wants to know your opinion on culturing embryo in PRP media to reduce RAF.
That is a good question. I haven't tried, but many of them they are using co-culture, that is granular cell culture. See, whenever you are removing oocytes, the cumulus is there. So many of them they are taking this cumulus and instilling inside that LG media or any one-step media or three-step media. So this co-culture or removing these endometrial cells also in this culture media gives a good growth, because they are rich in growth factors as well as cytokines. So that will help in growing the embryo. That is a co-culture techniques. there are studies, and co-culture has helped in cases of recurrent implantation failure to have good embryos.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, you spoke about sildenafil. So the next question is, when should we stop sildenafil and aspirin prior to ET, ma'am?
See, they say that sildenafil citrate can be started from the 6th day of cycle as it is a nitric oxide donor and 5-phosphodiesterase inhibitor. It will improve the blood transfusion. It is a vasodilator. So when you are giving from the 6th day of cycle, if you are not getting a good endometrium, in that case you can give QDS dose or you can give a vaginal dose of sildenafil citrate. But as it increases the vascularity of the endometrium and also the vascularity of the cervix. So during ET, it would be very messy to put this sildenafil citrate. So one day prior to ET, you stop it, because many times you will get bleeding when you are doing ET, because the cervix has become very vascular due to sildenafil citrate. And second thing is the messy part of the sildenafil citrate. You have to clean a lot of sildenafil citrate and then do a transfer. But main important thing is it causes vascular perfusion of the cervix as well as the endometrium, so blood supply is more. So that time, one day prior to ET, you have to stop it. And aspirin also, one day prior to pick up, 2 to 3 days prior to pick up, we stop this aspirin, and sildenafil 1 day prior to ET.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Dr. Shilpa. She wants to know if you spoke about high resistance, ma'am. So the question is like, if uterine Doppler shows high resistance on the day when you start progesterone, can we start low molecular weight heparin?
See, high resistance is there. Don't start low molecular heparin. Means you meant to say in -1 cycle. She meant to say this thing in frozen embryo transfer. She's saying.
She's not mentioned that, ma'am. She just said that on the day of starting progesterone, if the resistance is high, can we start low molecular weight heparin? That is the question, ma'am.
You can continue. It won't hamper it. It will reduce the resistance in the arteries also. Definitely.
Right, ma'am. Right, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is, you mentioned about thin endometrium. So again, it is with relation to PRP. So in thin endometrium, Dr. Shilpa wants to know when to start PRP and how frequently can we use it, and what can be the maximum number of doses, ma'am?
As far as studies are told that you can do PRP twice. That is done. So if you are doing so if the day of transfer is you are doing transfer on the 19th day, so PRP, and if you are giving progesterone to her, prior to progesterone you will be seeing the endometrium. So once you are given a frozen embryo transfer, if you are doing and you have developed the endometrium, so endometrium is, suppose it's not developing up to 8 millimeter mark by 10th day also, or by 12th day of progesterone of estradiol valerate, in that case you can go for a PRP. So once you are gone for a PRP and you see a good developed endometrium and not getting good result, then again you can repeat it 48 hours prior to your transfer. 48 hours prior to your transfer. And one more thing is to give a good thin endometrium. One more study is that nowadays we are giving SCG also. SCG has a role to play because there are SCG receptors, human chorionic gonadotropin receptors inside the endometrium. So when you are giving SCG from the day 8th of the cycle to these patients for 7 days, for 7 days, till day 15, in that case you give 150 microgram, 150 international units subcutaneously for 7 days, and you will still see good growth of the endometrium. But how you have to give 150 international units means it has to be dissolved in same amount of water, that is distilled water. That is, if it is 5,000 international unit, you dissolve in same amount of 5,000 international unit of distilled water, and then you give it subcutaneously from day 8 to day 15 for thin endometrium. PRP you can try once on the 11th or 13th day of this cycle first, if you are not getting good endometrium. And second PRP, we generally do it 48 hours prior to transfer if I am not still getting good endometrium.
Thank you, ma'am.
And on the second chance means once you have done PRP, not getting after 48 to 72 hours, again you can repeat it.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is you spoke about myoma resection. So Dr. Vijayalakshmi wants to know, what do you mean by lateral enhancement in hysteroscopic myoma resection, ma'am?
Yeah. Lateral enhancement in not in myoma resection. Lateral enhancement I am doing in patients who are having recurrent IVF failure. When you are doing a second look hysteroscopy, these patients are some of the patients who have T-shaped uterus or who have a arcuate uterus. In that case, we do lateral enhancement of the uterus, means with a bipolar resectoscope, with with a normal saline as a distillation media, we take a lateral electrode or a L electrode and we enhance the lateral walls of the uterus 2 to 3 stripes. 2 to 3 stripes, you can say, that not only increases the regeneration, that helps in regenerating. In some of the studies they say the endometrial vasculature is increased and also helps in regenerating the endometrium in cases of T-shaped uterus and in case of recurrent implantation failure and some of the cases of arcuate uterus.
Ma'am, you also touched a lot about Trental, that is pentoxifylline. So Dr. Shirin wants to know, can Trental and aspirin be given in IUI cycles also?
Yeah. Trental and vitamin E. Nowadays they are saying Trental and vitamin E. 400 milligram BD Trental can be given in cases of recurrent implantation failure or IUI patient. Also, if she's planning IUI 6 months later, 6 months prior, also you can give a combination of vitamin E with Trental. Only side effect of Trental is you have to see to it. It is also vasodilator and anti-fibrotic effect it has. So if you are giving this in these patients, some of the patients may have headache. So you have to reduce the dose many a times. Right. So you can give a Trental in these patients. And
so, ma'am, actually, then, if you because if you use it for long time, then are there any chances of any side effects like bleeding and all that, ma'am, like aspirin?
One study I had read that they have given for 6 months for prior to IUI or IVF cycles. 6 months prior to IUI and IVF cycles.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is when should we start low molecular weight heparin in spontaneous pregnancy in RAF patients with an immunological cause as an etiology?
That you have to start it prior to her pregnancy. If she's planning for, if she's a case of this frozen embryo transfer, or she's planning for or IUI. So in that same cycle, you can start. Previously, she has abortion. Now she has come for IUI at your place. From 5th day of the cycle, you can start with low molecular weight heparin. Definitely. According to her weight now, it is just 20 to 40 units maximum. But post IUI, you can give her according to her weight. But prior to IUI, you can give up to 20 to 40 units maximum, which can be given empirical, not more than that. We generally do, if the patient is on long-standing low molecular heparin, we generally see to it her APTT or BTCT is done basically every month. BTCT is easy to do, or you do every 3 months the APTT, activated partial thromboplastin time.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, one last question from my side. Ma'am, you spoke about coenzyme Q10 and its role as well. And ma'am, you also covered the male factor in RAF, which is the sperm DNA fragmentation and DFI index, which is commonly done today. There are a lot of studies which say that there is an emerging or important role of antioxidant enzymes like glutathione dismutase, superoxide dismutase, glutathione reductase, vitamin D3, and coenzyme Q10, ma'am. What do you think is the possible role of these molecules in managing the sperm DNA fragmentation better, ma'am?
These are the patients. If the patients are having recurrent abortion, recurrent IVF failures, these patients should be given empirical treatment of. And one more thing is, I would like to add that whenever you are treating a patient of chronic endometritis with, then in those patients you give doxycycline for 14 days or with metrogyl for 14 days. The partner is also given doxycycline for 14 days, metrogyl for 14 days. Along with that, you give coenzyme Q10 for 60 days. They reduce the reactive oxygen species. They say ROS is reduced, and the sperm DFI, whatever the stress factors are there, or whatever factors responsible for sperm DFI are there, smoking, stress, and all those big factors are there. These factors are reduced, so the DFI content is reduced to 15%. If you give for 60 days and coenzyme Q10 along with this antibiotics for 14 days, it will definitely help them to improve the DFI. But I feel if the patient is having, in spite of giving treatment, patient is having recurrent IUI failures, these patients will be counseled for TISA-ICSI, because many a time the ejaculated sperms contain more of fragmented sperm than the patients of testes, because the reactive oxygen species are less in case of testes. So if you do a micro TISA or a TISA in these patients, you get good yield of sperm and they give good pregnancies. Otherwise, you go on doing 6 IUI failures, and if the DFI is increased, there is no role in doing IUI also and IVF unless you do a TISA-ICSI in this patient in spite of having a normal count.
best case scenario is to ask them to smoke, ma'am. But that's always. So, ma'am, thank you so much on behalf of Shield Healthcare. Lots of compliments, ma'am. Very nice presentation, wonderfully explained, wonderful talk, very nice and useful lecture, very nicely explained. So first, I would like to thank the audience for being very patient for almost an hour and a half, and listening to ma'am. And special thanks to ma'am with so much enthusiasm and energy and a lot of passion. Ma'am always does whatever ma'am does, it is with a lot of passion. So I have seen that. And thank you so much for being very patient and answering all the questions also. Thank you so much, ma'am.
I'm thankful to all the participants who have heard me patiently. Thank you, Sheil. Thank you, Kiran, and all my members. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wish all of you a happy IVF day. Hope so all the IVF patients have good pregnancies and have normal babies. That's more important. And now we are coming to the designer baby era. I hope these babies are normal rather than having designer babies. I feel the baby should be morphologically and mentally normal. That's more important because psychology also plays a very important role nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
कुठे काही चुकलं विकलं यार तिचं काय ते